You are about to see Pandora Thomas speaking on the magic of diversity at the UCSC Kresge Town Hall on April 30th, 2015. The event was hosted by Kresge Common Ground Center, Education for a Just and Sustainable World. For more information, visit kresge.ucsc.edu/common ground.
How you guys doing? I can't hear you. How you doing? I told someone the story that I first came to Kresge UC Santa Cruz 19 years ago. We were, how did we, once I start talking. Is that okay? So me and my friends, it was like I had just moved to California, and my friend was like, oh, we're going to take you to Big Sur. And I was like, cool. And then on the drive down, he was like, first we're going to talk at UC Santa Cruz, which is basically a campus in the forest. And we'll see our friends. And I was like, hey. And we got to Kresge, and we never left like 5 days. Because we got here, and it was so beautiful, and they had a condo, and, well, the campus dorm. Does anybody live in Kresge? Yeah, it's a condo. So to come back 19 years later, back then I was an elementary school teacher. I know you're all like, how old is she? How is it possible? People were already like, are you a new student? So that'll be part of the quiz for the end. But to be able to come back and, you know, speak for Dave's class and share with you all is really an honor and a pleasure. So again, my name is Pandora Thomas. I'm the founder of Earthseed Consulting. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the work we do, but specifically today I'm going to talk about social permaculture and what I call the magic of diversity. And I just want to appreciate how you all started. Do you start every class with that gratitude? How does that feel? Do you have any other classes that you do that in? Okay, spread that. Because that gratitude that you're putting out there, we'll just come back to, and it's just such a beautiful way for me to see how what I would call your generation is really entering into a lot of these conversations. So a lot of the work I do around sustainability, I like to root in this West African concept. Has anybody ever seen this image or word before? Anybody? Yes. What's it mean?
No.
Can you read it?
Sankofa.
Sankofa. No one's ever heard it? Dave?
I've heard the word, but I don't know the concept.
Have you? Do you know what it means, hon?
Go back and get it.
Go back and get. What is your name?
Laura.
Laura. This is a West African, actually the main word, and it means in order to move forward, we must know from where we've come from, or go back and fetch it. Now, is West Africa the only place that has that idea of understanding where we've come from? And living in the United States, we sometimes have like a memory lapse. We don't actually understand our legacy and what the stories and the movements that we're a part of are built on. So for me, a lot of the work I do, especially around the idea of diversity, is not going towards something that we have no idea what it looks like. We're actually reclaiming practices. It should be inspiring. It's something that we have learned as long as humans have been living on this planet. So this idea of reclaiming, go back and fetch what it is that's in the DNA of all of us that can inspire us to show up and collaboratively learn together. That's the name of the class, right? Collaborative learning. You guys are a quiet class. It's okay, I'm from the Black church too, so there'll be some like opportunity for the, you know, I'm like from hip hop generation, so I need a little bit of like, you could go like that if you don't leave. I don't know, what do you have to do? So with that idea of going back and fetch it, I want all of you to think of someone in your life on whose shoulders you stand. All of you are in this room for a reason. You're all at this university studying, and there's someone that's inspired you, and specifically around this idea of sustainability or permaculture transition. That grandma, and all of these people in my photo are ancestors. They're no longer living. But I want you to think of someone either who is no longer living, or who is, who you've met or you haven't met. Two of the people in that photo, in those photos I've met, the rest of my never did. So bring that ancestor or that living person to your mind on whose shoulders we stand. And I want you to turn to your partner and just tell them a little bit about yourself who that person is and how they've inspired you. And go. Appreciate your partner sharing. And then let's actually take in a deep breath. Yeah. Absolutely. There's a little bit more energy in the room now. We have presence. Everyone's shoulders. We're not alone in this. Would anyone like to share the story you told? Who did you tell your partner? It's okay if not. And I call him. So if you don't raise your hand. Anybody? Anybody? Who did you share? Really? Am I going to have to call? Who did you share? Your mom. What's her name? Eleanor. And how?
I just learned this fact about my mom. I was talking to her on the phone the other day, and she said that she and I had no idea that she was involved in this program that was started like organic vegetation for schools and all that stuff.
What?
And she said, yeah, I was in charge of it, and I did that, and I talked to the principal, and I came to the board, so these kids are doing the work blah, blah, blah.
Really, Mom, that's awesome.
I had no idea.
What's your name? Thanks, Brianna. Who else? Share another story. Anyone else? Wow. What did you share? Yes, it's laughter.
Okay.
What's your name?
Riley.
Riley.
I'm one of my cousin's husband, Jonathan, and he lives in Scotland. He lives in a, like, WOOF. It's like the organization.
Who? Oh, WOOF. Worldwide Organization for Organic Farmers.
Yeah, and so he did it in Scotland.
Do you all know what woofing is? Where you can travel around, live on a farm. It's just awesome.
And now they live there, and she like was successful there, and he's still like, working with the farmers.
Everyone's trying. His name again? John. Anybody else? One more. What did you share? Did anybody share someone that is an ancestor who's not here, or an older person, an elder? Dave, who did you share?
I shared about my grandfather. When I was 12, I grew up in Irvine. There's a hill behind my house. And when I was 12, I took him up there, and he just gave me good attention at a time that was memorable for me and inspired me to become a teacher. And his daughter, my mother's also a teacher, so there's these stepping stones through the lineage from my grandfather and my mom and me. And I see stepping stones into the future, and I don't know where they're going, but they'll be in the lineage story.
And what's his name again?
Paul.
Paul.
PK.
PK. So the people who I'm sharing, in the top left corner, her name is Octavia Butler. And she's a science fiction writer, you heard of her? Yeah. And she actually, my company, Earthseed Consulting, is from her books. She had this ability. Did you ever read a book and someone's writing and you're like, how did they say the words I want to say better than I know how to say? You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like frustrated, like, I want to read the book. But she basically has these series of science fiction novels where she talks about the future and technology, sustainability, and race and just gender, all these issues, but in this way where you're like, whoa. So Octavia Butler, she's since passed, so she's one of my elders. That's my father, Lawrence Thomas on the top, right? He has passed away, and I'll talk a little bit more about him. Who is that in the bottom left corner? You should all know. Who? Wangari who? Her name is Wangari Maathai. Can you all say that? Wangari Maathai. Say it again.
Wangari Maathai.
First woman, an African woman, to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And guess what she won it for? Planting trees. She literally, I can't say single-handedly because nothing is single-handedly, and this is a collaborative class, but she infused the energy and inspiration to reforest Kenya because of the deforestation that's been happening. And she did it in this way where she mixed this idea of people, planet, and profit. Have you heard of that before? The triple bottom line? I don't know if you talked with them about that, but that's the newest thing now. Like, how can we have sustainability in ways that you earn a profit and the people are taken care of and the earth is taken care of? Permaculture's got the 3 ethics. So she did this. She also was the first East African woman to receive her PhD in zoological sciences. She had all these firsts. She wrote the book, The Greenbelt Movement. She started Greenbelt Alliance. So check her out. I got to meet her before she passed away, and that was really an honor to even meet an African woman. Because growing up, and this is a little bit about my story, I wasn't exposed to people, especially around sustainability, that looked like me or reflected my experiences. That's the power of some of the elders and the ancestors I'm talking about. And then this person in the lower corner. You guys know him? Peanuts? Yeah. You know everything. George, what's your name?
Garrett.
Nice to meet you. No, I'm not. George Washington Carver, what is he known for? Anybody heard? But what about Peanuts? Have you ever heard him called one of the leading environmentalists? Oh, you have? That's because you live in California. So it's UCSC. Have you ever had anybody tell you that he actually was a leader in terms of building his entire laboratory for his students at Tuskegee? This is over 100 years ago, out of all recycled parts, because he wanted to teach his student, yes, this idea of people, planet, and profit. What? In the South, where the food was growing, he worked with the African American community. He said, you know what? We can learn about the soil, we can learn about the land. We don't have to give up our community and our culture. And I want to teach you about conserving. I'm not going to actually take the money. We're going to go out and find all the pieces we need to build the laboratory we want. Not only did he do that, because again, everybody knows about Peanuts, and we don't actually usually call him a leading environmentalist. Because certain people get that category and certain people don't. He was an advocate for using living things to meet our needs. So for him, he was like, how can the sweet potato and the peanut make the things we need? Like tires. He actually was trying to figure out over 100 years ago, and it says up there, who knows, he may yet give Uncle Sam the rubber he so urgently needs. So again, imagine this man over 100 years ago, a lot of us don't know, he used living biomass to meet our needs. So when I was growing up, I didn't necessarily learn about people like this as leaders around the environment, around sustainability. So I had to go out and fetch those stories. I had to find them because for me, it's been all about relevancy. And how can this movement that's inspiring me to show up every day be relevant for more people, like me, but like all of us? Here's another one, Harriet Tubman. Who knows Harriet Tubman? Oh my God, please, everybody raise your hands. What is she known for? Underground Railroad. Anything else? You know how she was able to free all of those enslaved Africans? I'll throw a word at you. Her relationship to the forest ecosystem. Like permaculture. It's all about relationships. So the only reason that Harriet Tubman, for years, she had to navigate these forests at night, feeding people. She had to learn everything about the forest. She had to understand what was healthy, what wasn't healthy, the animals, the wildlife. So again, her relationship, her environmental connection, her ecological wisdom is part of what made the Underground Railroad flourish. I had to go and fetch that story, because when I learned about her during Black History Month, because that's when 20 years ago you learned about African Americans, it was like very isolated. It didn't tell the whole picture of her background. So I think the opportunity for me that I want to share with you is the journey that I've taken to uncover these stories and make this movement relevant for me and the people that I have the opportunity to serve. So that when you're thinking about collaborative learning and education and who you want to work with or who you might work with, you can have this way to be rooted in an idea that everybody on this planet wants a better experience for themselves in some way, shape, or form. It's our opportunity to meet folks where they're at. And for me, your generation is it. Because you're super brilliant and awesome and stylish and funny and all these things. And I feel like if you guys can make it cool, then everybody will follow along. That's kind of my homework from Dick. Oh, he left. Okay, anyway, that's my joke. So, my family is from the South, Carolina, and they were sharecroppers. Do you guys know what sharecroppers are? What's a sharecropper? Oh, who said yes? Okay, no one. Okay. It's actually a misnomer of a name. It was like a modern day enslavement. Basically, you lived on someone else's land, and you grew all their food, and you made all the clothes. You basically did everything. You were raised in like a cabin, and then you had to give everything you had to them, and then you had to buy it back. And I'm like, why is that called sharecropping? I'm sharing about that. But that's the name historically, and it wasn't just African Americans in the South that were sharecroppers. There were a lot of other ethnic groups too, but my family had that legacy in Chehalis, South Carolina, of being sharecroppers. So that idea of homesteading and, you know, living in line with the land, my family actually fled that as part of the northern migration of African Americans and moved up to Pennsylvania. So, you know, I tell my mom, like, oh, maybe a farmer, I have a tractor. She's like, are you crazy? Actually, my mom was like, why? Because there's this disconnect and this experience and relationship with the earth that was wounded and damaged. But miraculously, there's still a connection there. My father raised me fishing, and my mother loved to grow plants. So literally, both of them came from sharecropping communities. Migrated north to get away from what in their mind meant being poor and not having anything, to go to Farrow, Pennsylvania, where there was a bit of a tight-knit community, like 50% of the town in South Carolina, all migrated north. And when they got up there, my dad worked in a steel mill, my mother also worked in mills. They kept a piece of that connection to the earth, and they passed that on to me. Now they didn't say, Pandora, you're going to be environmentalist, and you're permaculturalist, you know, I don't even think the word had really been coined back then, but that ethic around relationship and conserving and understanding where things come from and being grateful, they passed that on to me. And I carried that into my education, into college. But in high school, when I was super excited about like, oh, I want to be like an environmental educator, biologist, or all these things, what do you think my teacher said? What do you think my teacher said? Don't you want to be a nurse? Or like, yes, they literally were like, and I was like, no, I don't study the environment. I'm telling you what, like, I love nature. So there was no, and then in the books and all the leadership, everyone that I saw, no one actually looked like me that was doing these positions. And even some of the people that might look like me, they didn't speak my language. So it was like, okay. Then I moved forward into college, and that pattern kind of kept going. Simultaneously, in my little close-knit town, I'm starting to see some of the social fabric break down. Incarceration was happening. Just all the challenges of our community, and that was impacting my family. And I'm going to touch a little bit more on that later. But so I get to college, and for me, I was still a tree hugger and love the earth, but I also was like committed to social justice. Does anybody here do like social justice work in a social justice organization? Raise your hands high. Okay. But you all know what it means, right? And a lot of times we separate it. So I would join the African American Student Union in college. I don't know if you guys have that. And their focus was not recycling cans or the owls. They were focused on the prison that they were building across the street from my university, at Youngstown State University, that was projected to house more African American males than would graduate from my university. So African Americans were like, how are we going to organize against that? But then I was in the Student Environmental Action Coalition, you know, all these other, I didn't keep the names of them, but the more environmental orgs, I'd go to those meetings and they'd be like, you know, why do black people care about the environment? They didn't whisper, but, you know, that one was like, why do African Americans care about the environment? And I was like, you know, speechless at the time because I knew we cared about the environment and that this was the environment, but I also knew that my friends who were in the environmental organization did care about the prison being brought up because it was slated to have all this horrible impact on the neighborhood. So both groups cared, but they just had a different focus. And for me, this was impacting me immediately. That's when I started thinking, wow, how can I be a bridge? What's the work that we can do to create, again, that word relevancy? Make the relevancy of them building this prison is in alignment with all these environmental issues that we're talking about. And that was just a kernel in my head like 25 years ago, but that's kind of been my journey. How to design programs, experiences, and just live in a way that creates bridges and more opportunities for people to understand their role in this movement. Then when I became an elementary school teacher at Berkeley, I started to hear this other kind of why don't question. It was like, why don't kids care about anything? Kids just don't care. They don't care, you know, they move from like the teachers in school. Have you ever heard that? Like, you know? And I was like, okay, I'm going to do an experiment, go to my little kindergarten classroom at the end of the day, invite all the kids into school, and I'm just going to ask them what do they care about. I can stop after like 2 days because they would leave. But I'm fine. They care about everything. I mean, they were 5, but then all the way up to 11. And they had a lot of things they cared about, and they were freaking out because they were like, no one ever asked us. Well, we can do something about it. I was like, what? Let's just talk about it. And so again, that idea, kind of like the, why don't African Americans care about the environment? Kids don't care. It was like, wow. Again, these stories, these experiences, people do care. And they're actually the experts of their stories. How do we create opportunities for them to engage in relevant ways? So that's really been my journey. And I've had to be that. Does anybody else relate with that? Like kind of having silo world, you're like, I mean, because I was an athlete, a cheerleader, and punk rocker, skater, you know, I'm a weirdo, and I was like, cool. It was all these different things coming together, and then I was passionate about social justice, but I was also like, that doesn't give you the opportunity to recycle just because you're like going to a rally. I mean, not to recycle, you know what I mean? Like, we need to think about our actions and bring this together. So that's a lot of the work that I've been doing. And I'm going to share stories and experiences about strategies in the past I'm taking. How are you all doing? Good. So, fast forward my career, and I'm a designer, and I'm doing all these things. And I learned about permaculture. So David said you all know what permaculture is. Who's going to tell me the 30-second permaculture definition? Wow. What's permaculture? In your own words. Or in someone else. We're in the words, I think. Okay, what's permaculture?
It's like connecting, connecting like earth and people and the egg thing.
There is an egg. Dave's got the egg shirt on.
And
Okay, I'll say it. My favorite definition is from one of my, he is my teacher, but mentors, the art of designing beneficial relationships. Because it's not so much in terms of permaculture, like there's a thing that you can say, there's permaculture. It's more the way we think about doing things and the relationships between things. So you know when I learned about permaculture, I was like, oh my goodness, relationships? So like relationship between the prison industrial complex and the environment. You know, for me I was like, yay, permaculture, I'm going to go to these conferences and join up with these people and they're all going to be talking about all these issues together. Did you think that happened? No. It was a lot about being focused on land design, which is fine, but for me I was like, humans live on the land. Like, we're the people piece. So again, where's the relationship? And I was taken back to my university days where it was like, what's the social piece? Because in permaculture, the social is already there, but it just hasn't been practiced or designed to enough. So that's why there's even something called social permaculture. We shouldn't even need the name social permaculture. It's a given, but it hasn't been. So then I also learned about the indigenous roots of permaculture design. Have you heard that? That like, you know, it's credited with 2 men in Australia who coined the phrase, and yes, but they coined the phrase based on a way of seeing the world and patterns and being in relationship that all of our ancestors, because we're all indigenous to some place, have been doing. We're all indigenous to some place. So, for instance, anyone Mexican or family from Mexico, or have you heard of the chinampas? Have you seen chinampas? They're still around. The chinampas are these floating gardens, and it's basically what enabled the Aztec Empire to grow the food they need and flourish. They created these integrated systems that had had food production. It was able to do water irrigation and remediation. The cultural practices of people coming together and build this and the storytelling is what helped the culture thrive. It was able to grow like 3 times more food than a lot of the monoproperty system that exists right now. And a lot of times when you're a permaculture designer, you're putting systems together that are land-based. These are the kind of systems that we celebrate, but also a lot of the cultural practices that they did. This literally is what helped Aztec culture to flourish. And guess what? You can still go to Xochimilco. Did I say that right? Did it right? Xochimilco? Xochimilco, and see these floating gardens. They still exist, and they're absolutely beautiful. They're not growing as much food in them now, but the design that was done and the intention and the practices still exist. This is a modern example of how these systems have lasted. So learning about the indigenous roots of permaculture design and understanding again, wow, it's really going to be one of my opportunities to make this relevant. I've had the chance to work with a lot of young people like kind of your age, and I want to share a video and a story of one of those young women and a partnership we had at a university in San Francisco, and her name is Idrina, and I'll let her speak for herself. It's actually been designed into our community. We're not stupid, you know? And going back to people, it's affecting all of us. It's just not talked about that way. When you start talking about carbon and parts per million, people are like, I don't know what's that. Climate change, that's what climate change is, I understand it. But if you're like, I pay more for gas, I pay more for food, you know, and then you make the connections. So Idrina's story has been really powerful because we started by taking them to the redwoods in Marin, which is considered to be this far off place. If you live in the Bayview or the East Bay, it's like a half-hour drive. But we took them up there, and part of it was a full dive into just experiencing the systems of a redwood, you know, the redwood ecology, much like the founders of permaculture. And you know, there's this whole idea that the only reason that redwoods are as tall as they are is because of what? Their relationship to the root system. So the mycelium growing underground, we're not just seeing the height of the tree, we're actually seeing how far the mycelium is growing too. So I was explaining that. I was like, yes. Yeah. And then Marquise, one of the young brothers, was like, wait a minute. If we can figure out a way to design inspired by that relationship, you know, I just went on with it. Now, that's a whole field called biomimicry. I didn't have to be like, I'm going to teach you about biomimicry, you know? It's like immersing him in those systems, and then he made the connection, and now all he wants to do is design like music, you know, all this stuff that's inspired by natural systems, which again is a career opportunity, biomimicry. Yes.
Food access piece.
Go.
When we talk about restorative food systems, here we just had an example of food injustice, right? So food justice, access to healthy food, that shouldn't be a privilege. That's really a basic human right? So we're talking about rebuilding the food system. We want to make sure that the door is open for everyone. So the question is how.
Yeah, and I mean, even a lot of the nice grocery stores in the nice neighborhood got crappy food too. You know what I mean? It's like a lot of our grocery chains, a lot of the places we get sustenance is killing, it's toxic for all of us. So I love that you pointed that out because again, so when they would come to the event, I could have said, hey, let's do a permaculture festival. And then how many young people would show up? But when we were like, you're about to bring your favorite wrappers, it's going to be, had to call it green. Totally permaculture infused, and it was green inspired. And then once they got there, we got them in the door, we talked about all of this stuff. But you gotta figure out how to get folks in the door first, and that's the relevancy piece. And on food justice, they get it. They're like, yeah. All the students would be like, our lunches are super crappy, and I want healthier food. And then we would have them taste something, and they're like, it looks weird, but it tastes good, you know? So, I use the acronym MAGIC to talk about some guidelines for thinking when I do any of this share these guidelines with you. And I'll go through each of them. And the first is this idea of messaging. How are we messaging this movement around sustainability or transition or permaculture, or actually, or whatever it is you're into, there's a message behind it. This is the flyer for the Fresh Fest, which is what you saw Adriana. We had a couple different events, but one of them was a Fresh Fest. And you know, it was in 2010, the largest youth-led eco-music festival in the nation. Frank the Green. Now again, we could have been like, come to the Permi thing. The Permablitz. We're at the Permablitz. I say all the time, and guess who shows up? People who even know what that is. But, first of all, this was 5 years ago. Is fresh still a cool word?
Yeah.
It was kind of, they said it. Back then, fresh was cool. So it's like, oh, get it? Food is fresh. We're fresh. Come, here's some fresh beats. You know, we made all those connections. And just getting them in the door, we had to get like, you're a Tribe Called Quest. Because we worked a lot with rappers, but they can't be saying shenanigans. So we had to work with the rappers that we could educate. I mean, like, this is what you're going to say. And a lot of the rappers that came did their songs that were Nova's lyrics. So we would use hip hop. You know, all these young people were like, oh, I want to create hip hop. So they would learn the whole day. They would learn, like, they take a workshop on beatboxing and mixing and being the beat girl, the beat boy, you know, the supposed four pillars of hip hop. But then at the same time, that was the year of Oscar Grant, or a year after, I think, Oscar Grant. We had a huge mural that used upcycled material, and you went over and you gave your prayers to Oscar Grant and his family. So you can get all that stuff out. And right now, where we're at, with all the frustration, people are desperate for ways to let that out, but that's building something. So I think it makes me sick to my stomach that we're still there, but huge potential there. But basically, we had to message it and frame it as, guess what? Dope day in the park. Y'all already go to the park and kick it with your friends. And then when they got there, it was like super hippie, but like cool hippie, permaculture inspired. And so these are some questions we can ask ourselves. How are we framing these issues? Permaculture has this thing that the problem is the solution. That's one of the principles. Is it a problem that's actually masquerading as an opportunity? A lot of people are frustrated with how young people be hanging out and youth culture and the bag. You know, we're like, let's take that and switch it and turn it into a day in the park for something positive. How can we see the relationship between issues and make the links in our work? So what are the links? You know, we had green jobs education, we had AIDS testing, you know, all these things that the young people were like, we need this. We just stacked functions and did it all that day. Is it about recruitment or relevance? Do you understand what I mean when I say that? Is it like recruiting people to come to your thing or come to our side? Or is it being relevant to what folks are excited about, making links? And sometimes you do need to recruit people. You know, you're like, I want you to come. So you recruit folks, but also, how can we make the experience relevant? And it only works when you talk to the people you're trying to work with. Because I'm not that cool. In my mind I am. But we have to say to them, okay, we really want to do this, but how can we make the event cool for your generation? And they were like, that's where the name Fresh Fest came up, because I would have called it something else. Tree something. It would have been the word tree in it. So, A stands for acknowledge community assets. This idea that anywhere there's people, there are people that care and are working to improve the community. They might not be using the same language we're using, especially around the work we're doing. And that's been the case, hands down. When, you know, we start talking about relationship and permaculture design, and then I talk to some of my healthcare friends who are more into wellness, and they're like, we care all about that stuff too, because we understand that the built environment is part of the problem in these communities. And people aren't spending time in the outdoors. And oh my God, if the design of these communities, you know, so it's like people care, but how do we see the assets and then build from there of people's knowledge? How are we functioning alongside natural cycles? Permaculture loves to say, what are the natural cycles that exist? Well, there are also natural cycles of growth and beauty and empowerment in communities. And how do we function alongside that and grow that? You know, we had to tell these young people, they all had a title, Minister of they were like the director or something. Because they got a title, and then they were like, oh, okay, that makes me feel good. I'm leading something. And I naturally want to step into this and be a leader. Also, what seeds have already been planted? How do we tend existing healthy systems, and what leadership or messages can we leverage? Again, with the Grind for the Green, it was like youth were already excited about hip hop, they're already excited about, you know, what do we do about youth violence, but also we like to hang out in the park, and when we leave the park, it can be dirty sometimes. So we were like, well, let's flip that and make it into a message that can be more inclusive and bring more of your folks out. Are y'all feeling this? Yeah. Because I can't talk to you. Start with asking the questions, what do people already know? Not do people are blank slate. This is an activity that, like the first week of the training, harvest the expertise of people's lived experience. So what I did, and we started with learning about climate change, is I put these pieces of butcher paper around the room, and the first one was like, what is climate change? How is it affecting your community? It's kind of like a duh. Ask people, what do you know about the topic? And a lot of them are like, yes, you don't know, I don't know nothing about climate change. And then I put music on, and they got up there, and they wrote all this stuff, and then we went around, and we called it the gallery. We read what they put, and it was like, yes, you do, because you're experiencing the effects of it right now. And they were like, oh, okay. So how can we harvest the expertise of people's lived experiences and value that as knowledge? Another favorite story of mine, I worked in the middle of nowhere, Virginia, at this place called Global Youth Village. And it was the first place to bring young people from Iraq and Kurdistan after the last Iraq debacle or war. And so you had kids from Indonesia, Iraq, Kurdistan, the United States, all coming. You know when you go to summer camp, they put you in a class even if you don't want to be in there? Because it fills up. Some of you, okay, you're like, yes. So my class was called Green Your World. But it was really permaculture. But I was like, I can't call it permaculture. They were like, yeah, Green Your World. And they put half the class in 1 minute. And I swear to goodness, all the Iraqi students the first day were like, I'm not going to do my fake Iraqi accent. But they were like, yes, we don't care about this green. We are from Iraq. Our country, you know, they had this long list of why they should be in the peace. And I was like, oh, why did they say shit? I was like, wait, step back in. What are your, you know, use your own tactics. So we started by putting the butcher paper up, and it was like, okay, what do you know about how climate change is affecting your community? And I'm thinking, oh my God, they're not going to write anything. They wrote for days and days, and they were like, I mean, you should see what's happening in its relationship to the, and our parks are going away and all this stuff. And I was like, you know what's green? And they were like, oh, we thought the green was like this hippie movement thing. I was like, no, it's about the earth and sustainability. And so then the more they started learning about and sharing how they observed their own Iraqi communities and Kurdish communities changing over time because of the war, but also just because of traditional practices going away. I mean, they talk about how their grandparents all lived in natural buildings. Talk about natural building. This is the cradle of the natural building movement, Iraq and Kurdistan. And they talk about, you know, how they grew up in the outdoors and how they're underwater, you know, water storage systems in their cities and towns. So again, it was like slowly we started to uncover the traditions that they came from. And what really got them was when I showed them the ecological footprint test of the entire planet, and the country that was like the second to the bottom in terms of least ecological footprint was Iraq. And they were like, see, like the US is at the top, we're the most horrible ecological footprint. Now mind you, the reason they're so low is because of all the damage, but at the same time they were like, see, this is because our country, you know, they were proud, and I was like, wow, it really works. This thing I claim that works. But it was starting with, what do they know and what are their experiences, and then showing them how other Iraqis and other young people are making that change. They were making solar pizza ovens, well, using pizza boxes just to make solar ovens. That was a little fun activity. G stands for this idea of growing leadership. This is a project I worked with, well, I should about in her video, that's dealing with all these challenges, also has 14 parks in San Francisco. There's literally 14 parks. And when you go to the parks, guess who'll be there every day, all the time? The older people. And especially like older black women. So there's this whole movement called Healthy Parks, Healthy People that has wanted to help make the connection between your health and spending time at the parks. And doctors are now prescribing something called park prescriptions, where doctors will say, okay, you've got I'm prescribing you 30 minutes in your local park. So we were like, you know what? Who's already in parks? Again, what's already in that cycle? Older people. How can we support the older? It was women and men. People to then encourage the younger generation to join them at the park for these healthy park, healthy people experiences. But we had to design it. It didn't just happen because there is a rift. But what we found was when we brought together multiple generations, there was like this new what we call ecotone. An ecotone is the principle governing where two new ecosystems or two new things come together to form a third, which has greater fertility, productivity, and diversity than either of the other two. And it turned out these elder women were able to get their grandkids, kids from the same generation together and spend time in the park, and the conversations that they had was even richer than before. So permaculture talks a lot about designing around the edge and ecotones, but it's the same people. How do we bring these groups that we don't usually bring together? It will create a more fruitful experience, but we have to design for that. Because we do still live in siloed communities, there's a lot of separation. But again, we're speaking the same language. You know, we had food, and it was the grandmas. Look how cute they are. Would you say no to them? We gave them a study bed. It was really cute. I stand for inspiration because, especially with what we're dealing with now, people are already saying enough crappy stuff. Like, I can't even look at my Facebook feed anymore. Isn't that happening? Because I'm like, I can't. So, people need at least to see examples of something that's inspiring at the same time that we're also learning about all the challenges. Now, you can't see this really well, but this is one of our Grind for the Green events, and they're actually holding up a poster that says Silence the Violence, because it wasn't Oscar Grant, I think that was the Trayvon Martin. Some other violent thing had happened. So they were mourning, but they were also out of the park being inspired. So we have got to find ways to showcase inspiring models, and that's why I'm excited about permaculture, because it is an inspiring alternative way to bring relationships and people together. And if we don't lead with that, no one wants to be a part of it. You know, it's kind of like, there's a Titanic and we're the party boat. So how do we make the party boat the fun boat? And I really think that you guys, your generation is key. So that thing with inspiration, what's inspiring you, and how do you add your passion into this conversation? Because like, I'm passionate about fashion. Could you tell? And I bring that. And I'm usually like, you know, when I'm with my hip friends, they're like, wow, you always coordinate your outfits. I'm like, yes. That's all I'm gonna say. This is a very important, the C, cultural relevance and competency. You heard this term? Have you talked about that in this course? This of all times, I think, is one of the most important social permaculture opportunities. Now, this is a picture of San Quentin. I worked in there for 5 years with men that started a program called the Green Life of San Quentin. And they started it. They, I don't know if you've ever heard of Van Jones. He used to work for Obama. He's from the Bay Area. He went in and he was actually the green czar of the White House. You know, Obama, he was like, I'll just have a green czar. And so a friend of mine came. And the night before he went to DC and left the Bay Area, the last place he went was San Quentin. Because he was like, I want to be rooted in like some folks that are really kind of dealing with some real stuff. So then he went to DC and quickly left DC. A year later, he was resigned, and then when he came back to the Bay Area, the first place he went was back into San Quentin. And I had a chance to go in with him and with that woman, Angela, because again, incarceration has been a big challenge in my community. At least 90% of the men, some of the women in my family are either incarcerated, dealing with it. So to get to go back into San Quentin with Van when he came out, and the message he had for this man was, you know what? You may be in a cage, but your mind is free. In DC, their bodies are free, but their minds are in cages. So he had this message for these men who are in for life of the potential for the change that you can put out in the world is exponential. And so they were like, oh, we gotta do this green thing. Again, they're in for life, but they were just as passionate about sustainability, being incarcerated. And they made the connection. They were the ones that were like, you know what? As I'm regenerating the way I behave in the world, we can align that with regenerating the soil, you know? They made the connection. So when I went in to work with them, they were like, you know what? You know all the permaculture design, environmental literacy stuff. Can you help us? And we'll make it culturally relevant for our peers. Because I'm not a man who's been incarcerated for 30 years. I would have been hugging and all sorts of stuff, but they were like, no, Pandora, no. But the men, as we created this curriculum together, they made it relevant for folks that they live with every day. I was able to just bring the curriculum. And again, that's an opportunity that none of them were trained as teachers, but they knew how to work with each other, and they understood what the other one needed. And around competency, this is like, for me, the most exciting part of where we're at in our world today. The planet is crying for us to become more aware, more connected, and more culturally competent. Kindergartners born today, anywhere in the United States, even in an all what they call white neighborhood, still has the most multicultural experience ever. Why? The food they're exposed to, the music they listen to, where their clothes are from, the TV they watch. You know, the list goes on and on. They're going to travel. So you might live in what we call a heterogeneous community, but your experiences are very global and very diverse. And so the opportunity for us to become more aware and culturally competent and build bridges, it's just going to make our movements and our communities stronger. So how can we have awareness of our own cultural view? I had to have that. I work with the young people, because again, I was listening to hip hop 20 years ago. And I listen to this stuff today and I want to cry. Sorry, you're filming Tears of Joy. Some of my friends are rappers. And Tears of like what? So I had to learn, even with working in San Quentin, like what's my cultural view of an incarcerated person? They did something wrong, they're less than, you know? So I had to shift back. Awareness of our attitudes towards cultural difference. We have to check that about ourselves because we haven't necessarily been taught it. But we can learn it and understand how to work together. Different cultural practices and worldviews, and then cross-cultural skill building. That, for me, is what social permaculture is. It's the opportunity to understand the patterns that exist and how people work together, and from those patterns, what principles come out for working in healthier ways together, and then what processes do we use. That's like the most exciting. Is that exciting anybody else? They're still being excited. So, fast forwarding, I said that I've dealt a lot with incarceration in my family. Anyone else? I don't know. Now I've asked this question. Is there anybody else who's willing to raise their hand that has family or friends that is incarcerated or does work around the prison industrial complex? Raise them high. I can see. Yeah, it's usually something. I have a lot of my family. So that permaculture principle, the problem is the solution. Most recently, me and the people that I work with were like, this problem of incarceration, if permaculture can engage with it, then we really are bought into that permaculture is something that we can use as a design system for working around the social piece. And so, I don't have to get into the left chart, but there's a disproportionate amount of certain groups of people incarcerated. Lower income people, but also communities of color. 60%, and this was like years ago, it could be updated now, of people who are incarcerated are considered communities of color? What percent, and that's like African American, Native American, Latino, First Nation, South, you know, all those. What percentage of the United States are people of color? Are we 60%? Are we 50%? Are we 40%? Are we 30%? We're less than 30%. So could we even be doing 60% of the crime? I can't hear you. No. So there's clearly, if you don't really believe or know about it, we can talk later about that. But there's a disproportionate, there's some called the prison industrial complex, it's a thing, you need to do something about it. But guess what? We actually have a cool governor who's been pressured and lobbied by a lot of people for a long time, and something called public safety realignment was created. So not only is there a disproportionate amount of certain people incarcerated, there's also too many people in the prisons. It's overcrowded. So what Jerry Brown decided to do was, you know what? Why don't we take people from prisons, move them into jails, and then release them? And you know, these are people doing nonviolent offenses like selling things and nonviolent offenses. So that will deal with one of those problems. So we got this problem. Tens of thousands of people released from California's prison. Literally like 11,000 people back into the community. They've done nonviolent things, they've paid their dues, and so that's this problem that California, and it's realistically afraid of the problem, because when you come home, what might be a challenge to re-entry? Getting a job, housing, they give you $100 and they're like, have fun. What else? Huh? Acceptance, not just from peers, but like real talk. How do we talk about people that are in prison? There's shows that dehumanize them, you know what I mean? No matter what you've done, you're seen as lesser than, even if you pay your dues. Anything else? Credit. Credit. And if you've been away for 20 years, there's all this new technology. So there's just a network of things that for you re-entering, it's almost like, wow, how can we create a way for folks to re-enter in a way that's regenerative for our communities? Because there's a lot of folks coming back, they're like, we did that, we ain't doing that no more. I'm trying to come back home to my community and do something better. So that problem of re-entry mixed with what my teacher, Brock Dolman, instead of saying climate change, he calls it global weirding. Because it is weird, it's like one day it's this, one day it's that. We thought to ourselves, what's the solution? The problem is the solution. Thousands of people coming home, what's the solution? The problem is all these people coming home, what's the solution? Thousands of people coming back into our communities. Do you get it? Nobody ever gets it because we have this idea, like, is that really exciting? Yes! It is if we view thousands of people coming into our community the way Mandela was welcomed back. You all know who Mandela is, don't you? Yeah. I don't know. So he's an ancestor. I should put it on my ancestor book. So, anyone know when this picture was taken? 15 minutes after he got out of jail. And guess what the world was doing? Yay! Mandela, singing and dancing, and all the celebration for him coming back in the community. It's a little different, but yet it's not. Because Mandela was a person coming back home, re-entering after going through being in prison. So we're like, why can't we create a Mandela welcome? Mixed with permaculture design that really allows folks to re-enter and be an asset. Like, let's put this social permaculture to the test. And can the earth and her systems and this way of thinking really help transform the way that folks re-enter and tell us, you know what, this is possible. So we started something called Pathways to Resilience, and it's my last video I'm going to show you. So, thoughts, reflections on that? Yes?
A couple of things. First, being on the presentation when you said, when someone writes a book and you read it and you go, why did someone put all my words so well?
I did say that, yeah.
You did that for me. I feel like all the things you said were like thoughts and ideas that are high that people have been like thinking about. Also, I wanted to point out that there's a lot of conflict and there's a lot of fighting going on, and I feel like there's like this element that's interested in getting people to be angry at each other because of all these issues that are going on. And bridging really is like the key to overcoming these conflicts. So whenever you're fighting with someone on the internet and they're saying like blah 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 blah, and you're saying blah 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 blah, and you can't find that mid ground, and you're just pissed off, and you say the world sucks and people suck, people don't know anything, but like what I got out of your presentation is restoring that connection that we have with others who are different, who think differently, who have like different backgrounds, but we deep down I think the key to making the environmental movement a bigger thing is restoring people's connection to nature and to others, because they don't care about nature because they're not connected with it, they don't even embrace to be connected to it.
Y'all feel that?
Yeah.
Who else? Thoughts? Let's go next. Do you want to share? You right?
That so much of our world has to do with our relationship to each other, to the rest of the planet, and between cultures and community. And it's really important to acknowledge that, because as soon as you bring awareness to the relationships that have to do with all the things in your life, things kind of just start piecing together and you understand things a lot better.
That's kind of like the piecing together. So Linda Kenlarden was like, I didn't even know I like digging in the soil. She was kind of like some of the students from Iraq I talked about, like the first day, she was like, yeah, I'll do the program, but I don't culture, whatever. I just wanted to do something different. And again, it was how we wanted to present it to try to make it relevant for her. You know, so thinking of relevancy, how is this movement relevant even for you? What excites you enough to show up to do whatever you're excited about? I like to talk about it, this idea of greening your passion, because that's really what it is. If we're not passionate and excited, we won't be able to fully show up. And so a lot of the folks in our program are like, now I'm excited to live in the world, and they want to make an impact. Okay, other thoughts? We're going to talk show this. How about you have anyone from anybody else here? How about some of you guys over here we haven't heard from? How are you?
Stand up.
Stand up. He just gives a thought together. I'll be back. Would you like to share, please? About anything. Video or...
I really appreciate you talking about the Sankofa and having time to appreciate it in indigenous traditions, and kind of that all of us have that we can pull from as a resource and making that connection. I think that's essential.
You feel that? Thank you. Back here. Thoughts even about the video?
Oh yeah, from the previous video about what was her name? Adriana. Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me was like at the very end, she said that like even though she's not green herself, she's trying. And I was telling with like my little girl saying that like well, I personally can't really relate to her. Like I come from a really small town, not from like a city, but her trying is what's gonna set off that domino effect, you know? Like even in Santa Cruz, we want to believe that we're very like environmentally aware, like by reducing like as much waste as possible, taking out the not the toilet papers, the paper towels like on campuses in order to reduce this kind of waste. But like even in Santa Cruz, like the city itself, I see like so much trash, so much waste on a daily basis. I work at the dining hall, we waste so much. And but the thing is, like, it's these little steps, you know, that will eventually like catapult this idea. And it's just very inspirational to see that, like, even a little like action can set off something, you know? Yeah.
Anyone else? Or who's next? You want to share?
I just think the re-entry program was like really awesome. My mom works like with people out of Kresge. She does like a ministry and like helps with re-entry as well. So I want to really push this. It's awesome.
Let's hear from the last comment. Anyone? I can't say the Bueller thing. I don't think you guys are old enough to see that movie. Oh.
I just think the re-entry thing is like super important. Like it really actually made me cry like watching that, because like shit, that's so important, and like you can't just like release people after they've been like, first of all, we're like isolating them for so long, and then like years later they're just like, okay, you're free. Like we really need that support, and like giving people that support is like.
Thank you. And you know what? We learned a lot from what they need in terms of what everybody, because none of you had to do it because you're learning permaculture here, but you get a permaculture design certification, 72 hours, you got all this money, and then everybody's like, I don't know what to do next, unless you have land or friends or something. So I think there's a lot of coming homes, people returning, veterans. I mean, there's so many groups, and even the folks that we're close to around engagement. So this is that opportunity. What's the potential of bringing more folks together so that we can really start making these connections? Because we really are not alone. Anybody else? Yes.
So this made me think about patterns. Talk about understanding patterns and, you know, natural patterns, but also social patterns. The more we do something, the more likely we're going to do it again and again, because it impacts our brain. So that could be a good thing, or that could be some kind of a bad habit or addiction. So to see how you're using permaculture to redesign the way people are thinking in their most vulnerable place, I think it's, you know, the social process is really beautiful. Thank you.
And we all need it. I did my own self-pattern permaculture thing. Like, it's an interesting activity to start observing your own patterns. Like, when you know, your patterns of sleeping, and when you have most energy, and when you feel most inspired. What's going on? That's a social piece. It's us. We are the environment. Penny Livingston, one of our teachers and friends, she says, we are nature working. There is no over there. And then Deepak Chopra has this awesome quote, I kind of lost it, but something like, there is no environment, we are just an extension of the earth. Or something like that. You want to say one more thing?
Real quick, I wrote in my notes to celebrate and welcome others, but I think it's also important to celebrate and welcome ourselves as much as possible when we're coming back from, like, you know, bad stuff or whatever. Just celebrate and welcome ourselves as part of nature. I'm calling it.
Breakup. I don't know. No, cycle. That's a great point. Any kind of breathing or experience of So, we just actually finished Pathways to Resilience. It's an 18-month pilot program with all, is it working? Okay. With all the partners. And some of the partners we've decided we learned our lessons, and now we're redesigning the program to figure out next steps. And so what I'm really passionate about, and I'm honored that I can do this, is the social permaculture. We're really engaging with folks and designing experiences that help people come alive. So that we're like excited to be doing all this stuff. So if anybody here is excited about that same thing and would like to hit me up about it, I live in the Bay Area. My website is pandoratomas.com. I want to be cooler and hang around with younger people. I'm already like, I like a lot than you guys are. So, and I just want to appreciate Dave for bringing me out here and for everything that you're doing in the community. He was one of my teachers, can you believe it? And it's not just a mistake. My name is Pandora, and there's this whole story that hope was what was left in the box. And I don't actually just have hope for the planet. I know that we're going to shift things, because we are shifting things and we always have. And so, I don't know if you have any more questions or comments, but it's been a privilege to speak with you all.